Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com.
Dressing children in clothing of the opposite gender. You have a beautiful kid's top, shoes, socks, a nice hat for a child, and the child and the clothing happen to be of opposite genders. Your child's a boy, and this is a little bit of a girl's hat, meant for girls. The pajamas were bought and used for your baby daughter, now you want to use it for your baby son. Is there an issue, is there an isser of leisilbash, of cross-dressing when it comes to children? So we all know and are aware of the biblical prohibition in the Torah, one of the lace essays, as recorded in the Rambam and Sefer HaChinuch, brought in Yeridea, chapter 182, halacha 5, that it is biblically prohibited for a man to wear the clothing of a woman, or vice versa, for a woman to wear the clothing of a man. As learned explicitly from the verse in Parshas Kiseitz, it's disputed amongst the Poskim, as we discussed in a previous lesson, regarding whether this prohibition applies only in the event that one's intent is to resemble the opposite gender, even if one wears it for other purposes, such as to protect from the cold or from the sun, etc. And over there we concluded that practically one is to be stringent unless it is a time of need. And hence we now come to our subject. After this introduction, what is then the law regarding children vis-a-vis the isser of leisilbash, of cross-dressing? So in general, in halacha, when it comes to chinuch, when it comes to educating a child, we find a difference in halacha between the two scenarios that we are about to mention. Scenario 1 is the child getting themselves dressed. Scenario 2 is a parent getting the child dressed. The parent, or any other adult, is the one placing the clothing onto the child. In halacha, as we find in chapter 343 in Orach Chaim, there's a differentiation in law regarding whether a child is doing something on his own that may be prohibited, and whether an adult is the one that is feeding him that matter that is prohibited. So let's begin with our first case. May children dress themselves. No parents help. They're putting on the clothing of the opposite gender. Does a parent, a father, or mother have an obligation of chinuch to educate the child and say, no, you're not allowed to wear this. There's an isser in the Torah called leisilbash. So one thing's for certain. Once a child has reached the age of chinuch, he must be educated by his father not to dress in clothing of the opposite gender, just as we must educate the child in all mitzvahs of the Torah. As written explicitly in chapter 343, halacha 2 and 3 in the Alter Rebbe. Thus only if there's no other clothing available and they need to wear it for protection from the cold or from the sun, and it's a time of need, then it's allowed. But otherwise they're not allowed to wear it, and the father has to educate them not to get dressed in these clothing. Now, from what age does chinuch begin? Because the implicit ruling of what we just stated is that if the child is below the age of chinuch, and the father sees, hey, look what he got dressed up as, he's wearing clothing of the opposite gender, he does not have to stop him, he does not have to educate him, he does not have to tell him to change the clothing, as the child has not reached the age of chinuch. So what is the age of chinuch in this regard? So in general, in chapter 343, we find a distinction between negative and positive commands in terms of when is the age of education. And it's all dependent on the understanding, the maturity, the mental maturity of the child. When it comes to a positive command, once the child understands the content of the mitzvah, he has to be educated by his father. By a negative command, however, once he understands that something's prohibited, that he can't do things, there's limitations and regulations in life, then he has to be educated in negative commands. So from here it would seem that once a child reaches the age of understanding no, that there's things you can't do, even if he doesn't understand the content and meaning, then the father has an obligation to educate him not to cross-dress. And so rules some poskim, as recorded in El Yaakov, footnote 33, in the name of Rav Yoshev. Others, however, write that no, in this regard we follow the age of education when he begins to understand a little bit, and that started from age 6. While the Igros Moshe, famous poskim of Moshe Feinstein, Igros Moshe of Ezer, volume 4, Tshuva 62, letter 4, writes an interesting approach, that there is no set age that we can say 4, 5, 6, 7, but rather it begins from the age that the child and the parents begin to be embarrassed that the child is wearing clothing of the opposite gender. Once there's shame, there's embarrassment involved, that's the age already you have to stop allowing your child to dress in the opposite clothing, and you have to educate him. But until that age where it's acceptable and no one makes a big deal, no one's embarrassed, it's allowed. So writes the Igros Moshe. Now let's move on to our second question. Till now we discussed if the father has to protest the child who already got dressed. May the parent dress the child in clothing of opposite gender if the child is below the age of chinuch. If he's above the age of chinuch, you have to protest him, so of course you can't get him dressed as we just explained. But if he's below the age of chinuch, like we said, you don't have to protest. Are you even allowed to physically put the clothing on him? So in chapter 343 we have a halacha which states that even when you don't have to educate a child, you're still prohibited from feeding him an isser. Just because you don't have to stop him doesn't mean that you're allowed to feed it to him and get him dressed. So seemingly based on this rule, so to here, it would be forbidden and prohibited for a father or mother or any Jew to place clothing of the opposite gender even on a 1-day-old child. And it's only if the child that got dressed themselves. You don't have to take it off. You don't have to protest if they're below the age of chinuch. But you cannot get them dressed in those clothing unless there's no other clothing available and you're doing it not for purposes of cross-dressing, as we explained in a time of need. As we stated, so concludes the Minchas Yitzchak in a Tshuva in Volume 2, Tshuva 108, and other Paiskim Manenu. However, the Igros Moshe, once again in that same responsa, takes a different approach. And he learns the entire concept of the silbash, which is in essence an aspect of promiscuity, of modesty, of morale, does not begin until the child is of age, or the parents of that child see that the child is of age, to be embarrassed to wear clothing of the opposite gender. But until the child reaches that mental maturity, there's no concept at all of this isser. The same way, Al Derech said, we don't find an isser of yichud between two children, a male and female child, before they reach the age of bar bas mitzvah min adin, from the letter of the law. So the Igros Moshe says it's not a problem. And those that are makpid mitzat tznius to cover, only place boy on boy's clothing and a girl's clothing on a girl, they're doing something extra that's not required. We have here a machlokes between two great poskim, the Minchas Yitzchak and the Igros Moshe. What does Kabbalah have to say about this? So there's a very interesting and quite fascinating statement brought in the Shlach Kodesh of Parshas Kiseitze, recorded in the name of Menachem Abavli in his Sefer HaMitzvahs in Lavin 3:13 and 3:14, which states as follows. The entire reason behind the prohibition to cross-dress is because a clothing affects a person's thoughts and emotions. And if one wears clothing of the opposite gender, it causes one to have an inclination towards promiscuity. Continues the Shlach Kodesh and writes, accordingly it's written in Svarim, that when a child exits his mother's womb, if the child is wrapped in a garment that is not of his gender, such as a male child in a female garment or a female child in a male garment, then that child will grow up to be very promiscuous. And therefore it's very careful for one to use a new garment that's not male and not female when wrapping that newborn child. And thus we see from here, from these holy words, that the clothing of opposite genders can have a tremendous effect on the soul of a child, even a newborn. And therefore certainly this is something, at least based on Kabbalah, even if though according to Halach it's left under debate, one is to be careful in and try to only place clothing of a male on a male child, clothing female on a female child, even when the child is of a very young age, such as a newborn. So to summarize, children who have reached the age of chinuch, some say 3, some say 6, must be educated not to put on clothing of the opposite gender. Children who are below the age of chinuch do not have to be reprimanded or educated, but the parent themselves, according to some poskim, is not allowed to place them, not allowed to get them dressed with the clothing of the opposite gender. And according to Kabbalah, if one does so, it has a very bad effect on the neshama. Accordingly, one should avoid placing a yarmulke on his baby daughter's head to see how cute she looks, even if the daughter is below the age of chinuch. And for the same reason, the girls should not be wearing tzitzis even for fun, even as a joke, and so on and so forth of cases of the like.
Thank you for listening to Shulchanaruchharav.com. Our free services of making Torah knowledge available to the public depends on donors like you. Please help us continue our work through making even a small contribution at Shulchanaruchharav.com under the Daily Halacha Dedication section or in the subscription page. Also, check out our online courses and many sefarim available for purchase that will both enhance your Torah knowledge and help support our work.